first presentation is by Marianne Heng, titled Nurturing and Inspiring a Sense of Purpose and Meaning in Our Youth. Marianne is Associate Professor at the Policy, Curriculum and Leadership Academic Group at NIE and former Associate Dean. Her work focuses on critical issues and interrelationships in teaching, learning, policy, and leadership that drive purposeful and transformative educational change. And her research has been published in Cambridge Journal of Education, Journal of Educational Change, and Journal of Moral Education. So may I now invite Marianne to present her research.
A warm welcome and very excited to see teachers, teacher leaders, school leaders, counselors, colleagues from MOE, and I believe a special group from the Singapore International School in Hong Kong. So my topic is nurturing and inspiring a sense of purpose and meaning in our youth, and I'll begin right away with this opening slide. The concept of the VUCA world was first used, I think, more than 30 years ago by the United States military after the Cold War, and it's commonly used to describe the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. But as in 2022, all this has come to a head with existential threats in a VUCA world, with global peace, climate change, and lives disrupted. In 2021, school interrupted. And here we see in 2021, a slide in India, students under an umbrella trying to look for 3 bars on their phone to check their Wi-Fi to get access into it. So I would argue that in these particularly challenging times, it is not enough for us to focus on academic excellence, and I'd like to make a case for why purpose and meaning matter. My talk is not on character and citizenship education specifically, but for all teachers and school leaders, and this is in line with MOE's vision that every teacher is a CCE teacher. And also, it's important for leadership development. In fact, I'm always it warms my heart when I see this, when I queue up at the ATM to get money. Our world's best bank in DBS, we've always believed banking has a higher purpose. And I'm thinking, wow, collectively, if as a nation, our Singapore schools, we have this similar vision for ourselves in a higher purpose, how much that would lift us. And in fact, over the past week, I've been at the Methodist Girls' School, also talking to students, and I'm very enchanted by their school's theme, Here for a Purpose. So this research actually began as a blue sky project, and the conceptualization came about through long conversations with teachers, sometime in 2013, 2014. That was at the time before the revised CCE came up, and also during the time that it was developed. And I remember sharing some of my papers with Ms. Tan Chen Ki at that time. Okay, so sorry, I can't seem to. Okay, so this is the outline for my presentation. I will pick up the pace a little bit because I have a number of things to share, and I hope that's okay. So I will make a case for why purpose matters, and then share some findings from my projects, and then talk about some examples to teach with and for purpose, and end with a purpose-driven vision of schooling. Jean Tan will complement this presentation nicely because she will go into the specifics of the details of how examples in which we can use in the classroom and for various ways in which we can extend CCE. So I like to start with the why question, because purpose is about the why question, and beginning with what we are doing schools for. Scholars such as Deng and Prof. Gopinathan have talked about the use of PISA results as a chief yardstick for measuring the quality of educational performance of a system, and if that's solely used, it's a narrowing of the function and purpose of education. So I'd like to remind us of that starting point. And in addition to what Suzanne shared about the findings from the National Youth Council, this was Deloitte's 2021 Millennial and Gen Z survey of 23,000 respondents in 45 countries, where they found that almost half of the millennials and Gen Zs in Singapore say they feel anxious and stressed all or most of the time because of the uncertain future. But I'm thinking that the problem is probably a little bit more in our school system, because I think this was a survey done on people who are already working. And so a little bit more in terms of the rise in mental health issues that we're aware of, and in terms of, sadly, students who sometimes cannot take the stress and check out of life altogether. So I'm not sure if this little bar here is blocking the screen. Okay, sorry. So this actually goes to students' growth as persons reduced to meet economic ends. Scholars like Fielding remind us of this, and that the worth of schools tied to measurable achievement outcomes. We're doing lots of wonderful, wonderful things. So in this particular session, my aim is to have us pause and think in terms of what else we can do a little bit more intentionally and as a whole school endeavor, right? Okay, sorry, okay. William Damon at the Stanford University says that the biggest problem growing up today is not actually stress, it's meaninglessness. So I'm not sure if you agree with this. I've actually posed this question to some of the students whom I've spoken with more recently, right? And they've got some very fascinating insights to share. So back to the question, the why question and the what for question. What should we be preparing our students for? Particularly when 65% of the children entering primary school today, and we know this, they will hold jobs that currently do not exist. So we've been doing very well in terms of preparing students for the economy, for achievement, and that's important because we're in a knowledge-based economy. But at the same time, I think there's growing awareness, and in line with Minister Chan's vision for alternative narratives of success. And I'm making a case that I think our students need alternative narratives of success. So we do well in teaching children what to think, how to think, but here is where maybe we can think a little bit more intentionally about how to decide what is of value and why. So this body of research, the theoretical basis for this comes from two bodies of work. One is the Educational Change Scholarship, where there's a call for a fundamental shift to both the academic and human purposes of education. So the academic purpose of education certainly continues to be very, very relevant, but the purpose of this talk is to make a case for the human purposes of education, the human experience of schooling. We're doing well, and I'm trying to share some of the findings in terms of areas in which we can do a little bit more perhaps. And for a while now, scholars have also been talking about students as educational change partners, right? I'd like to introduce the concept of purpose, and this is based largely from William Damon's work at Stanford University. I was on a sabbatical some years ago, and I visited him at Stanford University, and this is where this definition has come from. He's done, and his team, a lot of work internationally and in the United States on purpose research. So it's a central life aim that's a long-term driving force, and it's a compass. And the point here, it's beyond the self goals, right? So concepts like grit, like resilience are important, but I think these are largely protective factors. So purpose here is more than motivation. It's a long-term driving force. And it's not just about self goals, about doing well in exams. It's about beyond the self goals. And I'm thinking that during the pandemic, this has shown us more than ever how it's important that we can't just be on our own, that we won't be safe until everyone else is safe. This interconnectedness and beyond the self is important. It's a second order or meta virtue for human flourishing. And the little bit in purple says that it's different from happiness, which is largely about the present moment, that purpose and meaning in life involve integrating the past, the present, and the future. So we sometimes take on tasks that are very challenging. That doesn't bring us much happiness because there's a lot of challenge in doing these tasks, but we persist, I think, because we believe in, it gives us a sense of purpose and meaning. A little bit more in terms of the definition, that purpose is a long-term, high-level and stable intention to accomplish something that is personally meaningful and for a greater and positive good beyond the self. All people are capable of discovering life purposes. And for most students, the discovery of purpose and meaning will not happen on their own. So this is based on the US and international research, and there's quite a huge body of work in this area of youth purpose, that it can't be ad hoc and on their own. A number of students will be left to flounder, right? Okay. I'll go to my next slide. This is an interesting slide on the life satisfaction and performance across education systems, and OECD slide based on the PISA 2015 results. And I believe Singapore did not participate in the PISA 2015 and 2018 life satisfaction surveys. These were optional surveys. So on the y-axis is life satisfaction, on the x-axis is academic achievement. Here they're measuring science scores. So in this quadrant, you can see China, Japan, Hong Kong having low life satisfaction and high achievement scores. So I'm wondering if you'd like to make a guess as to if we had taken part, where we would fall in this quadrant. And I have some research findings to shed a little bit more light. So this is, I thought, an interesting slide for us to mull over, right? So how can we seek both the academic and human purposes of education? The current focus is one of achievement and success, preparing for the knowledge-based economy, which is important. Use of evidence-based practices for teaching and learning, which is certainly important. So what can we do more of? Could we do a little bit more to make education purposeful and personally meaningful for students? So the revised CCE framework certainly speaks to that directly, and there's a lot of wonderful efforts going on in school. The second point on the right is find out about what students make of school and why, their well-being and aspirations. And here, I suppose it gets a little bit challenging in terms of balancing the demands of time, but there are, I know, initiatives in school in which this also happens, but the students also have some things to share with us, right? So this is some studies that I've published based on this work. And what is interesting here is that the studies on youth purpose research that I shared, that began as a Blue Sky project some years ago, was done not just based on Singapore students, because I think when we study at the national level, we get insights on one hand, but when we broaden this to include other countries, it does give us some kind of, I think, a deeper understanding. So this was done on Singapore sample of students, secondary school, and also a similar sample in Israel. Similarities, both countries, as you all know, education is highly regarded. They have a centralized Ministry of Education, and Singapore students are known for high achievement in TIMSS and PISA tests. But in Israel, as you're aware, they have, it's known for its creativity and high number of startups, etc., etc. And this was a mixed methods research where we did 4 instruments for both students in Singapore and Israel. They are the Life Goals Questionnaire that measures purpose, and Meaning in Life Questionnaire. So these are all very well validated questionnaires. So Meaning in Life, I've not said much about it so far. Just a quick definition is the significance one makes of one's life. So simply put, the meaning in life is to find one's gifts. So the purpose is life. In our study, we define it this way, is to use this gift for the benefit of both self and others. We also had the Child and Adolescent Support Scale, which measured teacher support, parental support, peer support, people in my school. And satisfaction with life scale, we also added one item to measure satisfaction with school. So when we say satisfaction with life, it actually refers to satisfaction with school and life. And in our study, we took it broadly to mean well-being. In addition, we conducted clinical interviews with students one-on-one. We had about close to 30 students that we spoke to. Similarly, in Israel, they did one-on-one interviews with students. Some of these went to quite a long time because we had the luxury of that time in the project. And also we did some follow-up interviews with students, 10 students 1 year later. And we found that there was by and large stability of responses. Of course, a number of students matured and so on and so forth. And we spoke to them about their responses the year before. So this is an interesting slide. It's based on simply the Singapore students. You can see we have encouragingly 45% say self and other. And what does self and other mean? Self and other means self goals like exam goals, I want to do well, and so on and so forth. But it also means other ways in which we want to make the world a better place and so on. So these are the people who had the highest scores or second highest scores on all-purpose items. We had the self-focused group. These are the ones who focus on making money, having fun, which is understandable. What was worrying was that we had 18% with no orientation, and they scored lowest or second lowest scores on all-purpose items, right? What is interesting is that for the Israel group, there was no orientation. So you can see there are only 3 segments here. Here we have 4, as compared to 18% in Singapore with no orientation. So actually, we had 3 students with no orientation in Israel, but it was statistically too small to be analyzed, so it was left out. So the further analysis of the findings are interesting, because in this one, and I hope you can see this slide, this is a slide that shows the school and life satisfaction, the y-axis, and purpose, different purpose profiles, right? So, and Singapore is in the solid color, Israel is in this lighter color. We can see that for all purpose clusters, Singapore students had significantly lower school and life satisfaction than Israel students, right? And the next point is that no purpose orientation for 18% of the Singapore students had lowest and significant negative impact on school and life satisfaction. So it does lead to lower well-being among the students, right? And this does compare with the international literature that shows that adolescents with life purpose show higher levels of school and life satisfaction. And what affects school and life satisfaction? We found that presence of meaning, parent support, and teacher support were positive predictors of school and life satisfaction. Parents were important because students tend to turn to them to talk about larger life matters, right? And so they were the strongest predictor of school and life satisfaction. Teachers were very important too. And we had very heartwarming stories of teachers who made a difference. One student who in 1 year became so enchanted with the learning of Chinese, she wanted to be a teacher and to have everyone know more about the rich Chinese culture to everyone, to know about the rich Chinese culture. And so we found that Israeli students had more life meaning and parental support. Okay, so these are other findings, that students would like teachers to talk to them about their learning experiences. So they did recognize that teachers were busy, and they did recognize that teachers did spend time, but there was a sense that their lower secondary teachers, so this was a secondary cohort that we were focusing on, the secondary teachers, the lower secondary teachers had a bit more time. The upper secondary teachers, particularly those preparing for O-levels exams, understandably were very focused on the academic matters. They felt that that maybe a little bit more can be done in terms of the content, in developing curiosity, etc., because as students remind us that a lot of the stuff can be found on the internet, And so they find it more interesting if some of these connections can be made to larger issues. Accountability measures, the third point, that was that some of them, there was a range of responses. They had rich experiences in the VIA projects, but there were also some who said that, I think particularly because VIA is done outside curriculum time, that at the end of the day, it's still service points for the O-level people who use it for their leads points, etc. And they felt that, it's something that over and above a packed workload, the focus wasn't there in terms of what they were learning from VIA. So the last point I mentioned earlier, that they do tend to turn to friends and teachers for help with studies, but for parents and siblings, for questions about life challenges, and social media certainly an influence. So the next slide, Joan. So this teach with and for purpose, it's a summary of what you are already doing, all right? But I would say perhaps to do it a little bit more intentionally where possible. So certainly take time to listen to students where possible. They recognize there are teacher check-ins, form teacher guidance sessions, although there's also comments that sometimes these are used for other matters. And they felt that it does make them feel like a person if teachers do take time to talk to them. Even 15 minutes once a semester does wonders. The middle column, plan for high quality curriculum, which certainly is already being done in school. But this bit about aspiring to make school meaningful and purposeful. So asking not just what works in terms of getting students to understand concepts matter, because that certainly is important based on evidence-based practice, but what does it work for? What are the aims of what we do, what we value, and why? In the third column, the curriculum and school experiences as students' internal compass. That seems to be something that perhaps we could think about in ways in which that could be possible. And here I'm talking about a whole of school approach, including within the academic subject areas. Understanding the significance and relevance of learning and making meaningful connections to larger issues in education and in the world. So the next slide. In the past year, I made it was very encouraging for me to work with a group of very senior teachers and school leaders here at NIE in our joint NIE Teachers College Masters Program. And together we came up with this that I think help us to capture and apply and put into practice this definition of purpose. Firstly, on the left side, as personally meaningful. A mirror image analogy is helpful. It gives self-awareness, what are our gifts, right? Because you can't create a vision to share with the world if you don't know yourself. On the right side, for a greater and positive good beyond the self, a window analogy that gives social awareness is important. So after all, our visions are the what shapes our perceptions and our reality. Collectively with my class, it was very encouraging that we would brainstorm and we were trying hard to try to get these abstract ideas of purpose and meaning and to come up with classroom examples. So these apply whether it's there are examples for the primary school, secondary, and JC. So the left column, it's about current curricular goals, what students need to do and know. All right, so that's meeting the syllabus and so on. The middle portion is the mirror. So where are students at? And I think it's important to stop and find out where they are at. So I'm just going to use one example from economics. You can see typically they need to learn about growth from economic growth. But the formation of the self, using a mirror to find out where I am at, is what is growth for? What does growth have to do with me? And then to develop other level perspectives, the beyond the self, which is the definition of purpose, the window, who are students becoming and why? So some questions, hopefully these will be helpful for teachers. Who is growth for? What kind of growth do we want to pursue? What matters? What about equitable, sustainable, and green growth? right? So, and I'm sure in various ways these are done. So, but I'm just trying to document some examples for us to do it a little bit more intentionally. And so that a quick one to the next slide shows one for teachers and school leaders. So we may all have different understandings of joy of learning and resilience, school leaders, teachers, and students. And it'll be helpful, I think, to clarify where we are at as teachers or who are we becoming and why. And the last bit is my summary slide that pulls everything together. So in essence, a purpose-driven vision of schooling is to re-examine the purpose of school for a more human experience of schooling, a more, just the parts in red, a person-focused understanding of students, and I would say teachers too, focus on the academic and human purposes of education, developing a connected and future-oriented curriculum, formation of students with a moral purpose, with the internet, with all kinds of media available, this becomes really, really important. And human aspirations and well-being is important. And then on the right side, purpose in school and life, finding out the significance and value of learning, self-formation, flourishing of self and others, and importantly, engaging intelligently, ethically, with greater consciousness with a changing world. This is particularly important. We don't want our intelligent students becoming radicalized and who knows what. So, and the final slide to end, I love this quote. Education isn't something you consume. Education is about an experience at school that speaks to students as human beings to guide them in addressing the important questions of life. This is from the book, Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. So thank you. I think I've just, I've not made my time. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Marianne. I think just nice. It's on time. We're on time.
Okay.
I think you raised many thought-provoking points. I think especially what stood out for me is the shift towards a more humanistic versus economic approach to education. I guess three things that kind of stood out for me is this idea of how we need one, alternative narratives of success, right? Moving beyond what and how questions to philosophical questions like why. These are this makes me wonder whether we need to infuse like ethics and philosophy of education also in our teaching as well. And then you talked about purpose as also something not just related to the self, because often we could think of purpose as the self trying to find happiness. But I think what you also remind us is that purpose has a other-centric dimension. And a lot of times what brings fulfillment is when you contribute to the happiness and the flourishing of another person. That itself can be very fulfilling and purposeful. And then finally, I think what you raised is this idea of the role of schools. And I think a lot of practical examples, how we can help foster curiosity, how we can introduce a range of experiences that students can explore, and rather than just becoming so academic oriented. Yeah, so I think these are a lot of good food for thought. I look forward to the questions later on at the panel discussion.